In the heart of Moscow, on a rain-slick street, the wail of sirens cuts through the night. The flashing blue and red lights paint a chaotic scene on the face of a drab Soviet-era apartment building. This is where a story begins, a story of darkness, desperation, and a final, shocking act of defiance. The world would come to know them as the Khachaturian sisters. Christina, Angelina, and Maria. To their neighbors, they were just quiet girls living under their father's strict roof. But behind closed doors, a nightmare was unfolding, year after year, hidden from the world. What happens when the place you call home becomes your prison? And what pushes three young women to a point of no return? This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about survival and the agonizing price that sometimes comes with it. Inside apartment number 8, the air was always thick with fear. For years, the sisters endured a life that most of us can only imagine in our darkest nightmares. Their father, Mikhail Khachaturian, ruled their lives with an iron fist. He wasn't just a strict parent, he was a tyrant. Their home was a fortress of his own making, a place of isolation and control. He installed surveillance cameras to monitor their every move. Their phones were taken, their contact with the outside world severe. They weren't allowed friends, couldn't use social media, and were rarely permitted to even leave the apartment. School was one of the few escapes, but even that was a privilege he could, and often did, revoke. The psychological torment was constant. He belittled them, humiliated them, and controlled every aspect of their existence, from what they wore to when they slept. He was a man who demanded absolute obedience, and the penalty for any perceived defiance was swift and severe. The emotional scars were etched deep, creating a constant state of anxiety and terror that became their normal. The abuse wasn't just psychological, it was relentlessly physical. From a young age, the sisters were subjected to beatings for the smallest infractions. A misplaced item, a low grade, a moment of perceived disrespect, anything could trigger their father's rage. He would use anything at his disposal. He kept an arsenal of weapons in the apartment, not for protection from the outside world, but to intimidate and control those within. A pneumatic pistol, knives, a hunting rifle, these were symbols of his power. Constant reminders of the violence he was capable of. He would threaten them, telling them that if they ever tried to leave or tell anyone, he would find them and harm not only them, but also their mother, who had long since fled the abuse herself. They were trapped, caught in a cycle of violence with no apparent way out. They tried to seek help. They reached out to neighbors, school officials, even the police. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. Their father was a powerful, intimidating figure and a master manipulator. He presented himself to the world as a devout, guarding father, and his daughters as disobedient and problematic. The system failed to see through the facade. Each time they reached for a lifeline, it was pulled away, leaving them more isolated and hopeless than before. The message was clear. No one was coming to save them. They were on their own. As the years of torment bled into one another, something began to shift within the sisters. The shared trauma that had once isolated them now forged an unbreakable bond. In hushed whispers, in the dead of night, they found solace in each other. They were no longer just individual victims. They were a unit, a trio bound by suffering and a growing, desperate need to survive. The fear that had paralyzed them for so long started to curdle into a quiet resolve. They knew they couldn't endure it any longer. The constant abuse was taking its toll, not just on their bodies, but on their minds. Maria, the youngest, was suffering from severe psychological distress. The older sisters, Christia and Angelina, saw the light fading from her eyes and knew they were running out of time. Escape seemed impossible. He had threatened to hunt them down. He had convinced them the world outside their apartment was just as dangerous as the one within. The idea of running away felt like a fantasy, one that would only end in more pain. So, in the darkest corners of their shared prison, a different plan began to form. It wasn't born of malice, but of pure, primal desperation. It was the last resort of three people who had been pushed far beyond their limits. They had to end the nightmare once and for all. July 27th, 2018. It was a day that started like any other in the Khachaturian household. Mikhail had been particularly cruel. He had punished one of the sisters for not cleaning the apartment to his impossible standards, releasing pepper spray in her face. The air was thick with tension, the familiar sting of fear mixing with the chemical irritant. That evening, as their father slept in his armchair, the sisters made their move. The moments that followed are a blur of terror and adrenaline, a culmination of years of repressed rage and pain. Armed with a hammer, a hunting knife, and the pepper spray he had used against them, they confronted their tormentor. It was a desperate, chaotic act. In the aftermath, they were the ones who called the police. When officers arrived, they found a gruesome scene. They found three terrified young women, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and a strange, hollow relief. They confessed immediately, telling the police everything, not just about that night, but about the years of unspeakable abuse that led to it. They weren't trying to hide what they did, they were trying to explain why. The arrest of the Khachaturian sisters sent shockwaves across Russia and the world. The initial headlines painted a simple, brutal picture. Three daughters murdered their father, but as the details of their lives began to emerge, the narratives started to shift. Investigators uncovered overwhelming evidence of the prolonged and horrific abuse the sisters had endured. Medical records, psychological evaluations, and testimony from the few people who had glimpsed behind the curtain all painted the same horrifying picture. The public was divided. To some, it was a clear case of premeditated murder, but to many others, it was an undeniable case of self-defense, the only possible outcome for young women who had been failed by everyone. A powerful grassroots movement began to form in support of the sisters. The hashtag, "I did not want to die," went viral, becoming a rallying cry for victims of domestic violence across the country. People took to the streets, demanding justice for the sisters and calling for long overdue reforms to Russia's domestic violence laws, which offered little protection to victims. The case was no longer just about Christina, Angelina, and Maria. It had become a symbol of a broken system, a flashpoint in a national conversation about abuse, justice, and the right to survive. The legal battle was long and arduous. The prosecution initially pushed for murder charges, which could have sent the sisters to prison for up to 20 years. Their defense team argued that this was a textbook case of self-defense, a response to years of cumulative trauma that created a kill-or-be-killed reality for the girls. The court proceedings were a painful reliving of their trauma. The sisters, pale and silent, had to listen as the darkest details of their lives were debated in a public forum. The case highlighted a critical flaw in the legal system. The law often fails to recognize the concept of battered woman syndrome, or the psychological state of a person under long-term, sustained threat. It sees a single moment of violence, not the years of terror that led to it. After immense public pressure and a lengthy investigation, the charges were eventually requalified. For the two older sisters, Christina and Angelina, the charge became murder committed by a group with prior conspiracy. For the youngest, Maria, who was a minor at the time and deemed mentally unsound due to the abuse, her case was separated, and she was ordered to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment. The fight was far from over, but it was a crucial shift, an acknowledgement that the circumstances here were anything but simple. The case of the Khosheturian sisters remains a landmark, a stark and painful reminder of the hidden realities of domestic abuse. It forced a national reckoning in Russia, sparking widespread debate and pushing the issue of domestic violence legislation to the forefront. While their legal fate is still not fully sealed, their story has already created permanent change. It has given a voice to countless silent victims and exposed the failures of a system meant to protect the vulnerable. The story of Christina, Angelina, and Maria is not just a true crime saga. It is a profound human tragedy that asks us difficult questions. Where is the line between victim and perpetrator? When does the act of survival become a crime? And what responsibility do we, as a society, have to see the signs and intervene before it's too late? Their home was a prison built of fear, but their actions, born of desperation, broke down walls far beyond their apartment. As the sun rises, casting a new light, it brings with it a glimmer of hope. Hope for justice, hope for change, and hope that no one else will ever have to pay such a high price for their own survival. Thank you for watching. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, please know that you are not alone and help is available. We have included links to resources in the description below. Please reach out. Your story matters, and your safety is a priority. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into cases that challenge our understanding of justice.